Imagine you are trying to park your car in a garage, but the garage is already full of old furniture, boxes of high school yearbooks you haven't looked at in 20 years, and a broken lawnmower. You can try to jam the car in there, maybe push a few boxes aside, but eventually you're going to scratch the paint. Or worse, you just can't get in. That garage is your mind, and sometimes, before we can park anything new and shiny inside of it, we have to clear out the junk. If you're ready to do a little spring cleaning for the soul today, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It helps other people find this quiet space on the internet. So let's take a trip back to the Meiji era in Japan, to a misty mountainside, to witness a meeting between a man who thought he knew everything and a man who knew just enough to keep pouring tea. Our story begins with a university professor, and let's be honest, we all know this guy. He's the type of person who doesn't just walk into a room, he announces his presence. He has more degrees than a thermometer. He has read every book, written a few of them, and has an opinion on everything from the geopolitical climate to the correct way to slice a bagel. Let's call him Professor Tanaka. Professor Tanaka was feeling a bit stuck. Despite all his accolades, all his tenure, and all his knowledge, he felt a nagging sense of dissatisfaction. He had heard whispers of a Zen master named Nan-in, who lived high up in the mountains. People said this master possessed a clarity of mind that was transformative. Now, Professor Tanaka didn't really believe in mysticism. He was a man of logic, a man of facts. But his curiosity, and perhaps a little bit of his ego, got the better of him. He wanted to go up there, debate this master, and perhaps show him a thing or two about modern philosophy. So he packed his bag. And when I say he packed, I mean he packed heavy. He brought his notebooks, his reference guides, and his own published journals. He was ready to lecture, not to listen. The hike up the mountain was grueling. It was a steep, winding path, covered in moss and slick with morning dew. As the professor climbed, his internal monologue was running a mile a minute. He wasn't looking at the beautiful cedar trees. He was mentally rehearsing his opening arguments. He wasn't listening to the birds. He was formulating a critique of Zen methodology. He was literally sweating with the weight of his own self-importance. If you've ever been so busy thinking about what you're going to say next that you didn't hear a word the other person said, drop a comment below. We've all been the professor on that mountain. Finally, winded and wiping sweat from his brow, he arrived at a small, humble hut. It wasn't a grand temple. It was just a wooden shack with a leaky roof. Sitting on the porch was an old man, looking incredibly ordinary. This was Nan-in. Professor Tanaka didn't wait for a greeting. He didn't bow. He barely caught his breath before he started talking. "I'm Professor Tanaka," he announced, dropping his heavy bag with a thud. "I have a PhD in philosophy, I chair the Department of Theology, and I have come to inquire about the essence of Zen. I want to know how you reconcile the concept of non-attachment with the socio-economic demands of the modern era, and I specifically want to address the paradox of..." He just kept going. He pulled out a notebook. He cited 3 different sources. He was on a roll. Nan-in just smiled, a calm, easy smile. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He just listened to the wind rustling through the trees and the professor's endless stream of words. After about 10 minutes of the professor explaining why his own theories were superior, Nan-in raised a hand gently. "You must be tired from your climb," Nan-in said softly. "And you have spoken so many words. Your throat must be dry. Would you like some tea?" The professor blinked. He had just delivered a brilliant monologue on existentialism, and this old man was offering him a beverage? Yes, the professor stammered, a bit annoyed that his brilliance wasn't being immediately applauded. "Yes, I suppose I'll have some tea." They sat down at a low wooden table. Nan-in began the tea ceremony. Now, if you know anything about the Japanese tea ceremony, you know it is deliberate. It is slow. It is graceful. Nan-in placed the cup in front of the professor. The professor, meanwhile, was tapping his foot. His mind was still racing. Why is this taking so long? I have more points to make about dualism. Nanin picked up the iron teapot. The steam rose up, curling into the cool mountain air. He began to pour. The dark, fragrant liquid filled the bottom of the cup. It rose to the middle. It reached the rim. The professor watched, ready to pick it up and take a sip, eager to get back to talking. But Nanin didn't stop pouring. The tea rose to the very brim, the surface tension holding it there for a split second, trembling like a bubble. And still, Nanin poured. The tea spilled over the edge. It ran down the sides of the cup. It pooled into the saucer. The professor's eyes widened. What is this old man doing? Is he senile? Is he blind? Nanin kept pouring. The tea overflowed the saucer. It began to spread across the wooden table, a hot brown river heading straight for the professor's expensive silk robes. Finally, the professor couldn't handle it anymore. He jumped up, knocking his chair back. "Stop!" he yelled. "What are you doing? Are you a fool? Can't you see the cup is full? It won't go in. No more will go in." The tea stopped flowing. The steam swirled between them. There was a puddle dripping off the edge of the table. Drip, 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 onto the floor. Nanin slowly set the teapot down. He looked up at the professor with that same calm, kindly smile. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look like he had made a mistake. He looked at the professor, then at the cup, and said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations." The professor stood there, his mouth open, a droplet of tea splashing onto his shoe. Nanin continued, his voice as clear as a bell. "You come here asking for teaching, but your mind is already packed tight. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The professor stood frozen. He looked at the mess on the table. He looked at his soaking wet notebook, where the ink was starting to run, blurring all his clever notes and citations. He realized he had climbed a mountain not to learn, but to show off what he already knew. He realized he had been dragging that heavy bag of I know, up every step of the path. For the first time in his life, the professor didn't have a comeback. He didn't have a citation. He didn't have a theory. He just stood there, looking at a wet table, feeling the cool mountain air on his face, finally listening. There was nothing left to say. The cup was full. The mess was made. And in the silence of that messy table, the professor finally understood. The story goes that the professor stayed on the mountain for a while, not to talk, not to teach, but just to sit, to practice the very difficult art of being empty. We often walk through our lives clutching our cups so tightly, terrified that if we empty them, we will have nothing. But nature abhors a vacuum. When you clear space, life rushes in. So as you go about your week, ask yourself, is my cup too full? Am I listening to understand, or am I just waiting for my turn to speak? Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is tip that cup over, let the old tea spill out, and sit there, ready for whatever fresh, new thing is waiting to be poured. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who might need a little less noise and a little more tea in their life. Thanks for watching. Stay open.